Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada, and this episode is brought to you by Omnovos, Canada's retail customer engagement solutions provider. Join me next week for an insightful interview with Omnovos, where we discuss just how COVID-19 may have given retailers a bit of a gift, turning contactless shopping into brand loyalty. Learn more at www.realcustomerengagement.com. On this episode, Nicola Kilner, CEO of Deciem, the umbrella beauty company that houses a fleet of customer-loved beauty brands and retail stores, more commonly known as the Abnormal Beauty Company. We talk about how they maintain their pace of innovation, create wildly loyal brand advocates, and how the resilience that is part of their brand is helping them through the COVID-19 crisis. Next, the one and only Bryan Pearson, former CEO, Loyalty One Airmiles, is back on the podcast to talk about loyalty trends pre-COVID and his jump ball moments on loyalty programs and customer behaviors and habits. First, let's check in with Nicola from Deciem. Nicola, welcome to the Voice of Retail. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Michael. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks so much for joining me, making time to join me. I'm sure it's a super busy time for you and all your people, but why don't we jump right in? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal, professional journey, your role of Deciem, and for those less familiar perhaps than I, about the Abnormal Beauty Company.
So I'm Nicola, and I'm the current CEO and co-founder of Deciem. For anyone who isn't familiar with Deciem or the Abnormal Beauty Company, you may be familiar with one of our best-selling brands, which is the skincare brand, The Ordinary. But we are an umbrella of multiple different brands, but The Ordinary is definitely our biggest and fastest growing brand at this time. And I guess in terms of my journey, so I worked as a buyer for Boots in the UK, the retail chain here. And that's how I actually met Brandon Truax, the founder of Deciem, when he was at one of his previous companies, Indeed Labs, another great Canadian beauty brand. So that's how I met Brandon. And then he started Deciem back in 2013. And I joined in 2013. And, the company has been through many different chapters. I always think, the probably turning point was when we launched The Ordinary, because between 2013 and late 2016, when we launched The Ordinary, we had some success and we had some interest, but we probably were still that kind of struggling startup trying to make the world fall in love and believe in what we were doing as much as we did. And then The Ordinary launched and kind of everything almost changed overnight. And then obviously, we've had many different chapters since then. We've had some highs, we've had certainly our fair share of lows, but the business is in a really good place today, even in light of the current COVID pandemic.
Unpack that a little bit for us. How many locations do you have, and where are you in the world? I was watching a video in Australia, so I know you're a global company, but give us a sense of the scale and scope of the organization.
So in terms of our own retail stores, we have 35. Which are predominantly in the countries that we also have our own offices and warehouses in.
What do you think is the key to your long-term success? You're not a new brand. You participate in a category that is crowded. There's literally thousands of new brands that come and go, yet you have sustained over the long run, certainly, and have grown and have built a passionate group of customers. What is it what's that key? What is it that has made your brand so resilient, sustainable, and popular? What are those elements of success?
Well, I think you got it spot on when you said it's not an overnight success. And I think that understanding that it takes patience. If you want to build something that's going to be here for a long time, it's good to kind of take the baby steps to get there. Brandon always used to say, before you can get 1 million people to like you, you first have to get 1,000 people to love you. And I think that focus on that core audience is really important, and almost, focusing on that small audience, that core consumer, and ignoring everything else, even to the extent of ignoring trends. And, if you look at what everyone else in the industry is doing, if you look at the trends that everyone else is reading, you end up doing what other people are doing. And the chances are, as a startup, you're trying to do what they're doing, but with less money and less substance behind you. Right. And, when I look at The Ordinary, we were told in the very early days when we started to kind of show people the concept, by many people, you need to change the packaging. Consumers won't understand this. You need to call it just...
It's too white. It'll get dirty on the shelf, right?
That was definitely one. You just need to call it hydration serum, etc. And, it took a lot of courage to actually say, no, we're not changing. And if it means we lose an audience, that's okay. And I'm so glad we didn't change, because actually, it worked so well and we have such an amazing following now. But it's hard to sometimes make those decisions where you really are putting your brand first and business second. But I think if you can have the confidence to take that stand, then ultimately business will always follow, and things change. But if you can almost be the one who leads a trend rather than follows a trend, then I think it's probably the best way for a journey.
Well, it's such a great insight. I mean, modern marketers today, we all think of the marketing mix and influencers is something newer than your brand, yet you were there already. Brandon was there already with 1,000 passionate advocates from which a brand can flourish, and absolutely, smaller brands with less resources, less distribution, they have to be innovative and have to just go down their own path, or they're just going to get lost in a sea of choice, right? This massive sea of choice that both retailers have to list and consumers have to buy. Let's talk about your current state of operations around the world. How and in what ways is the organization faring during the COVID crisis? Let's start with your people. How are you managing the team on the front lines of the brand at retail?
I respect that everyone's situations are different. And if someone is maybe in a household with someone who's vulnerable, maybe their class is vulnerable themselves, we don't want them to feel the pressure that they need to come in and, their jobs are all secured. It was kind of just pick the right choice for you. And the people that do want to come in, we want to recognize that actually they're kind of saviors for keeping the business going, and they should be rewarded for that, but also making sure that they have additional compensation if they need to, take different means of transport to come in, as an example. So we really did that. And then what we have done with our store teams, again, recognizing, we've got over 300 of our own team working in Deciem stores. And we class ourselves as a family. We don't want a single Deciem employee to have to fear for their job security during this pandemic. So we quickly implemented some software which actually allows our store teams to offer virtual consultations, so they can do that from home. And, it's just a great time where we have over 300 extremely knowledgeable, wise people on Deciem products that want to share their experience. And then you also have an audience who are probably spending more time at home, maybe taking more time for self-care. They're looking after their skin more than ever, who want that advice. Mm-hmm. It's been amazingly popular. If anything, it was probably a failure, because I think in the first week, only 2% of the chats we were able to do live, because the demand was higher than the amount of people we had working on it.
Well, it's like we've been speaking in the rest of the industry that some trends were and have been accelerated by the COVID crisis, and we saw that live chatting, associate to individual in Asia, but we didn't see it as much in North America and the rest of the world. It feels like that's going to be a bigger part of retail and a bigger part of brands going forward. It sounds like you're echoing that experience as well. That's really interesting. This week I had a great week interviewing business leaders like yourself. In fact, I interviewed the president of Bunnings in Australia, from Melbourne, and we were talking about how his organization, his people, had a 1-2 punch, so to speak. They had the wildfires, the bushfires, and then they had the COVID crisis. I think we would struggle to find a brand that had faced the same adversity as you have. As you say, you've had ups and downs, and the passing of Brandon. Do you think in some way that's prepared you as a leader and the team and the organization as a whole to take on the COVID crisis with the perspective that you have to build that kind of organizational resilience? Do you think that has had an effect from that perspective?
I think our team and our people are definitely our strongest asset. And there's no doubt that everything we collectively went through in 2018, and then the horrible passing of our friend Brandon in early 2019 changed the way that people work together, and it built such a huge level of resilience. Relationships took on a new form where I think for the many people in the business who were there at that time, it wasn't colleagues. It was, you were in this kind of support network together trying to see how we can get through this. How can we all help support this person we all love and admire and kind of want to get back to their best? So I definitely think it kind of built the resilience. And I think we all have a lot of respect for each other. And, my personal take on kind of leadership has always been, let's lead with kindness. And that was something that we really had to kind of make our biggest strength after everything we had been through. And I think the combination of kind of those elements is what has created this incredible sense of loyalty and commitment at Deciem, which is really kind of fostered in our culture. And I think that definitely has helped us now when we're in this situation, in terms of, we have a team that knows that even when you've been to the lowest of the low, it doesn't last forever. Eventually things do pick up. You come out of it hopefully stronger than before. So I definitely think it has helped build those people qualities. And then, just like everyone, we are utilizing Google Hangouts, video, Zoom. We've got an amazing internal platform, Thrive, where everyone kind of connects as our kind of internal social and comms. So we're doing a lot of what everyone else is doing too. And I think just kind of adjusting to this new way of working, but also trying to see, even post-COVID, it feels like we have a chance to reset the world. And you see the amazing, pollution being lifted, Venice, the skies over China, the color of the
it's really phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's hard to not be touched and wonder, how should we change the future of our day-to-day working lives?
Amy, it really sounds like you've got that DNA embedded in the organization. It's really fascinating to listen to. Let's talk about how and in what ways you're planning to change the operations of your retail stores. And maybe I wanted to also touch on a little bit of supply chain issues in manufacturing, since you're a brand yourself. I mean, your stores are, the experience is part of that stores. You've got retail partners who of course assist the other 90%, and you're online. But when I think about the experience in the stores, or when you think and your team thinks about the experience in the stores, how do you see that differing during the COVID era? As you said, it's not a couple of weeks. It's going to be ostensibly in one way, shape, or another until there's a cure, or until there's a vaccine. How are you starting, and what lens are you starting to look through what experience looks and feels like in the new era?
So I think because we're probably we're fortunate in a position that we are probably actually doing better than before in light of the COVID situation. I think it gives us some luxury in terms of deciding what to do with our own retail stores. My heart goes out for other businesses and brands who are more or less solely reliant on bricks and mortar. Because I think even when the government start to ease the restrictions, I still think we're a long way away from consumers wanting to come in and browse and have kind of that leisurely experience that they perhaps did before. Even though I think, when we come out of this, human connection will be something that really matters more than ever. So we are going to be looking at keeping some of our stores as virtual stores for some time, which would be the idea between this Deciem at Home software we're using through our website. Wherever you could be your home, Michael, and you could go to our website and actually connect with someone, a Deciem ambassador who is in the store, who can actually give you a tour of the store. You can get a feeling for the brand, but it also means, they're on hand for all the products, the testers. If someone wants to see a shade of one of the foundations, they want to see the texture of another product. It would allow almost that kind of store experience to come at home. And then the other thing that we're exploring, which we're probably a bit behind with because I think everyone is doing it now, we're trying to implement it, is kind of this click and collect kind of curbside pickup model. Because again, I think there's an element of the convenience. Most of our stores are in quite convenient, kind of more high footfall locations, which, the footfall won't come back, I don't think, that quickly, because so many offices will be working from home. So there'll certainly be less people in those areas. But I think people are becoming more conscious around the planet. And there's, an element of, if you can kind of walk to the store to collect your order rather than it being shipped out, that will have some positive impact from a sustainability perspective. So we're looking to implement that as well.
Any thoughts on the supply chain, the manufacturing piece? I mean, whether it's product movement that is slower or faster, it's probably too early to really conceptualize big picture changes. But any early thoughts on the product itself and the movement of the product itself?
So we're definitely having a lot of challenges on supply chain, and rightly so, and challenges we understand. But it comes all the way from the components and ingredients, and obviously other people are having challenges, which causes an issue on supply chain. And
packaging, the packaging, and
all of our droppers
things, right?
in the ordinary are white, but actually we saw a couple of months ago we were going to have an issue, so we now have a product we are having a black dropper on temporarily because we just couldn't source any more white droppers, and we kind of thought actually consumers would rather have the product with a black dropper than go out of stock. So I think people are probably accepting of changes like that in this era. But everyone,
you're a great marketer. You'll probably call it limited special edition or something, right?
But it's a challenge because rightly so, we all have to protect the people who are still working in these facilities. But when you start to try and implement, the 2 meter distancing in kind of a warehouse or a factory,
sampling,
all of these things, and the extra time you need to shut down for cleaning and all of these things, it has a huge impact on your capacity. So it's something that we're really suffering at the moment, which for any of our customers who can probably see many out of stocks online with our partners, I think they come used to that from Deciem over the last few years. Yeah. Each time we think we're getting in a better stock position, something happens like this. But I think one thing from COVID is I feel like people have become more patient and more understanding of, the world could really end quite quickly. It's scary in many ways. So if we have to wait a bit longer to have a product, there's more important things right now to worry about.
What two or three pieces of advice would you give for retailers listening? You've had a great perspective around making sure to protect the people and the people first, and when you're ready to go, and leveraging technology. But as a communicator, as a brand builder, you're fantastic. And I wonder if you would have a couple of pieces of advice to retailers as we all start our journey into the new COVID era. And just as you said, there's change of customer habits, change of perspective. Some were already there. Concerns about the environment were already there, amplified, put in the background in the short term. But so we're all struggling to find a couple of pieces of direction in terms of understanding all these moving parts changing at the same time. From as you've been thinking about it, you and your team and operating globally, what are your kind of 2 or 3 pieces of advice to retailers on the days to come?
It's difficult in one sense. I guess before I give my advice, I will kind of just give the kind of pre-note that, I'm very fortunate that kind of when we come up with what we want to do at Deciem, we're in a very strong position at the moment in terms of our numbers and the business. And I can't imagine the pressure for many other businesses, especially retailers, who want to make decisions to do the right thing, but maybe have a conflict that doing the right thing could potentially make their business go bankrupt. So I have a huge amount of respect for the leaders that are facing those really tough questions at the moment. But I think one thing I've really noticed is the focus on how employers are treating people during this, and actually they're remembering that employees are humans. And actually it's been amazing even to see some of the support back from employees who I think are recognizing the difficult situation that their employers are in. And I think the businesses who have handled things with transparency, and, I know even with our team, there's been many times we've gone to them to say, look, we don't have the answer yet to this question, or we know this is on your mind. We're working on it, but, we're all in a situation that we haven't been in before. And I think that kind of just keeping people regularly updated, I do a video message to the team at least once a week, sometimes 3 times a week, just to kind of keep them in the loop with exactly what's happening. And I think even for a business that is struggling, I think that communication is really important. And I think, the way that you treat people really gets through to the consumer as well. There are accounts out there now particularly on social media, where employees kind of posted what their employers are doing, and consumers see that. So everything really links together. And I think people do want to buy from companies that treat their people well. So I think that's kind of one of the most important things people can do at the moment. And then I guess look at how technology can change business. E-commerce, you probably know a little bit more about how that sector of the industry is doing overall than I do. But from what we can see, it's booming. And I think consumer behaviors are changing, because you have people who in the past maybe never shopped online, who because of this had done, and they maybe have had a good experience. They realize it can be, convenient. There's things that it kind of can win on over bricks and mortar, and they may change their behaviors permanently for some categories. So I think businesses do need to reflect that, especially if this is something where, we are a year away maybe from having a vaccine or a cure. That's quite a long time to form a habit. So I think, retailers need to be looking at technology ways to change with how they can kind of keep up with those new consumer behaviors.
You and I were scheduled to meet here in Toronto, actually, at the Collision event. I was quite looking forward to doing this in person, but now they've transitioned to a virtual event. You're going to be on the stage, the virtual stage, so to speak. What are you going to be addressing or speaking to as part of that event?
So we're going to be talking a bit about The Ordinary, what made it different, even the design elements on it, and then also just, touching on COVID, how it's impacted the business, how we're using technology to find new ways to connect with humans. But I'm really excited. It looks like there's a great range of speakers.
Listen, this has been great. I really appreciate your time. How can listeners learn a bit more about your brand and your brand story? Is the website the best destination? What's the best? What's your advice on that?
Probably our Instagram is always the best, at Deciem, Deciem. Or of course our website. You can even talk to our live consultants if you want to learn specifically about products.
And Nicola, thanks again for being on The Voice of Retail. Really appreciate you taking your time, and I wish you and the organization all the best in the weeks and months to come. And be safe and be careful. Thank you.
Same to you. Thank you for having me.
Hi, it's Jim Okamura, partner at Macmillan Dewell and co-founder of Global E-Commerce Leaders Forum. We are very excited to announce the latest extension to the Global E-Commerce Leaders Forum events, the Global E-Commerce Tech Talks podcast. In partnership with Kent Allen, Scott Silverman, and our host Michael LeBlanc, we'll be debuting and discussing custom proprietary research designed specifically for global e-commerce retailers and talking to e-commerce industry leaders around the world to help us sharpen our saw blades when it comes to doing business across borders. Check out the 1-minute trailer episode available now. Apple and Spotify Plus, all major podcast platforms, with episodes debuting every 2 weeks.
Bryan, welcome back to The Voice of Retail. How are you doing?
I'm very good, Michael. Thank you for asking.
You and I were last together in Vancouver last year, so it's been a long time. Catch us up. First of all, catch us up on your professional, personal background. Lots of folks and lots of my listeners may not know you as well as I do. And then catch us up what you've been doing since we last spoke in Vancouver in the summer.
Sure. The short précis is I started in consumer packaged goods, moved to technology, and ended up because of database and data in the loyalty industry of all things, and worked there in loyalty for about 27 years at Loyalty One, being CEO for the last 11 or 12. And so that's better known for most people as the Airmiles program in Canada. But we also had a data analytics business, and we had a short-term promotional loyalty business, which was run out of the Netherlands. So that was largely my career. I left and retired from Loyalty One last August. And it's been really nice. I spent a lot of time traveling. The plan was just to kind of decompress and figure things out. And certainly in 2020 with COVID, things sort of changed. And so I'm back trying to keep my brain active and focused on the things I love, which is the intersection of retail and technology and loyalty and data. And so I'm on doing board and advisory work on some early stage companies, sort of focused in around the areas I love: consumer goods, retail experience, artificial intelligence. And I'm back writing again for Forbes on their retail beat. And that helps me kind of connect the dots and think about the bigger moving pieces in retail overall.
Well, there's certainly enough to talk about these days. It's, the most interesting of times, sometimes the most troubling of times, and we're all grounded from traveling. And for you, it's probably a nice break after global business and global traveling. And now you're settling in like the rest of us. So listen, let's start our conversation talking about pre-COVID. And while that seems eons ago, it was only about 11 weeks ago. I wanted to just talk about the trends and perspectives around everything from loyalty management to retail, I saw I think our last conversation we were talking about the rise of paid premium loyalty programs led by the Costco and the Amazon of the world. Tons of benefits, amazing renewal rates on that Amazon program. Sends their flywheel just spinning. Coalition loyalty programs were already in flux. So take us back in your mind to pre-COVID, because I like to have that conversation because, our good friend Carl Boutet has called COVID the great acceleration on trends. So it's good to understand what was already happening before we headed into COVID. And then we'll talk about your observations and thoughts around the COVID period.
Yeah, I think you had a bit of an extended spectrum in terms of what was happening in loyalty overall. As you hit on it, paid premium loyalty. I think that model was working really well for certain retail and service categories, Amazon obviously being the poster child. And they were doing a lot of interesting things and continue to add value to their Prime program through sort of content and access to the inventory of production elements that they had. So, I think that COVID's done nothing but to solidify that. I mean, if anything, most people have done more on e-commerce than they've ever done in the past, obviously. As you said, coalition loyalty, I still believe is something which is highly relevant and valuable because of the model, but it is in need of new energy. And I think we've seen a number of programs around the world sort of retrench and rethink about how they're going to compete in the new world over the next little while. And on the proprietary program side, that's probably at the other end of the spectrum for me, which is kind of the more of the disappointment space. I think there's still more discount based, and it's often lacking, the value that you'd want for consumers, for everybody but top customers. And there's different ways to design loyalty programs that you can kind of address that in a way that makes more sense. And certainly, I think across everything, what we saw pre-COVID is that loyalty programs largely were really about the discount and sort of a promotional platform. And despite the fact that they could connect much more robustly into efforts around your customer experience and about driving relevance and communications, that still remained an opportunity for most organizations. So I think that's the world in loyalty as we were coming into COVID.
So let's talk about the COVID era. So many of those trends may have been accelerated. I mean, I really love your perspectives of what you've seen so far. I mean, in one way, it would seem loyalty is owned or earned by a different set of things that used to be in the background. Safety, for example, we were talking off mic about what it's like now to shop, and my observations are all the cleaning and hygiene that went on, from grocery stores that used to be behind the scenes because you really didn't want consumers to kind of see all that kind of cleaning stuff, is now front facing. In other words, you want them all to understand how much, you basically can have surgery in a grocery store now. It's so deep clean on a regular basis. Amazon is talking about inoculating their supply chain, spending $4 billion to do that, whatever that means, without a vaccine. But they clearly think that's a front forward facing. I got to call out the airlines. Oh my goodness. What a time for airlines, and then of course a time to be associated. What's your assessment so far? So many moving parts, but let's try to hone in on a couple of things. How do you feel about retail, about loyalty today versus you did, 2 months ago? I guess, what trends do you think have been accelerated and what trends have gone sideways, and what's new?
Wow, Michael, I think there's about 8 questions in there. Let's
It's a dense set of questions.
Exactly. It's been an incredible time to be an observer in and around retail. I must say, it's, to your point, there's been so much change. I think, most companies were just worried about keeping the wheels on if they were allowed to stay open at all. And if they weren't allowed to stay open, they were thinking about what the world would look like when they were allowed to open up. So I think from a retail standpoint, loyalty in the COVID era has very much taken a back seat because the consumers in a very different place. Consumers are worried about finding sanitizer and flour and doing all that in a safe environment. And back in the Airmiles days, we used to always say that when a consumer moved their household from one point to another, we kind of called that a jump ball, use a basketball metaphor, right? Their loyalty to everything from banking, grocery stores, gas stations could all change because of proximity and ease of access. And so, how did you manage the consumer's move in a way that kept loyalty back to the retailers that they were using before and services they were using before? And I think COVID's created this kind of giant jump ball. Only it's in a completely different environment because of technology, because of e-commerce, and because the rules foundationally around safety have come to play in the game, right? And so, companies definitely went back to basics in the first 2 to 4 weeks. And for me, what I find interesting is what started to happen around week 3, where you started to see a complete shift to creative thinking and some ingenuity. And that's the fun part, restaurants, grocery stores, et cetera, as they started to get a little bit of flexibility, started thinking, how can this work? What can we sell? If you're a food service distributor to the restaurant industry and that business has gone away, how do I access the the retail climate and get to the consumer?
The Cisco of the world, right? Cisco, big pivot, right? Cisco pivoted and suddenly, I asked Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, my contributor, my partner on The Food Professor, what he thought of that. He said, if you would have asked me that 4 months ago, I would have told you were smoking some really good cannabis. I would have, right. The farthest thing from what he would have expected would be an organization like Cisco, which is so purpose driven to serve food service, to pivot and start, shipping to home or having consumers pick it up.
Right. And so, everything on how you connect with the customer, how you develop these new, lines of communication, but also sales access to the customer. And whether it's doing takeout when you never did it before, or figuring out how to do curbside pickup, or, just driving new experiences for customers. So I think there's this incredible amount of change and creativity, which for me, has been fascinating to watch. And I think consumers, as they've been trying to, manage their own concerns around how often do I go to the store, or, where do I access these things that I'm looking for, have, as a result, been open to these new experiences. And I think that will forever change the landscape at some level, right? And on loyalty, on that side, I think there's a couple of things that have been done right, but I also think that some companies woke up in this era and went, oh my goodness, I've got this asset that has been underinvested in, and are really trying to understand, what's happening with their customer bases, and have discovered that in fact, hey, I don't have a current address, so I can't use my customer database for communications, right? Or my customers will have no way of achieving their status levels this year because they've had 2 months where they haven't been able to earn anything. The airlines are a perfect example of that, where they kind of recognized that early on, and kudos to them. They reached out to people like me who flew a lot and said, your status this year is good until the end of 2021. And I think that's sort of taken the air out of the tension for certain consumers that are used to certain levels of service from certain providers. But at the end of the day, I think loyalty, to your point, back to the safety issue, took a back seat in the first number of months. And now with the Cisco's and the other food service purveyors, for example, let's just take food retail, right? Those guys started to creep in and started to sell through directly to the consumer. And all of a sudden, the food retailers, who saw like a 35% jump in their sales in the first few weeks, are seeing, are not seeing those kinds of sustained gains because the consumer has found alternatives. And
all of a sudden, they have a new competitor, like overnight, that is a national competitor with pretty tremendous capabilities, who may just kind of like it here for a while. They may not just be doing something opportunistic. They may go, hey, this is not a bad little side business of mine. Particularly, you think of the Cisco example, the restaurant industry is probably going to be harder hit certainly is today than retail, because at least you can have some retail at open. And restaurant, I don't know how that math's going to work out. Half occupancy in a restaurant is tough, right? So yeah, you're as a grocer, you're used to the landscape of players plus or minus one or two nibbling around the edges, but now you got a pretty big player nudging their way in, eh?
Yes, and frankly, a lot of local players as well. And while that might not hurt to the same degree, I do think, certainly in and around the Toronto marketplace, we saw an uptick in the amount of organizations that, in an effort to provide service back to their membership base in some form or another, were basically offering, links into box produce that's coming out of the greenhouses down in the Niagara Belt, and so
farm gate, right from the farm gate, right?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of alternatives out there. People are home and not doing as much consuming of food outside of the home. And the net of all that is they're starting to look and be a bit more adventuresome and look for different opportunities and look for different supply points. And I think that's just a part of that is just exploration. A part of that is, I think, a retrenchment. All of a sudden say, wait a second, I want to eat healthier, or I want to be more local. And so there's this real melange of and mix of trends and activities that are all coming together to create a new norm, which is quite interesting.
Let's talk about loyalty benefits, and let's follow that thread of changing behaviors. And let's talk about loyalty benefits for a minute. I mean, soft versus hard, earning points versus earning, experiences, so to speak. It feels like, one experience that I might think, and I wanted to get your view on this, as stores are mandated and for practical reasons, limiting the number of people in them. There's, we're all going to get used to, lining up like for a pretzel in New York City. We're all going to get used to lining up to get into stores at one point or another, particularly as the season goes on. Do you think there's room in loyalty programs to think more laterally about these benefits? Should you, as a top performing or a top customer, have, it's almost to use another brand, front of the line access in a different way to actually get in the store? I mean, it's one thing to manage that, of course, line skipping in the real world. But do you think those kind of benefits will start to emerge as well?
I do think that we will see that, particularly in things like fashion retail and some of the smaller retail categories, what I call high street retail, which is sort of Main Street Canada. I think that, having worked with food retailers and the pharmacies and some of the larger retail formats, every time you turn around and had a conversation around best customer programs and would you give them a preferred lane, they really tended to shy away from those kinds of experiences because they worried about how, the other customers would perceive that. And what's interesting is when we raised those kind of questions with consumers in the past, consumers kind of got it. They went immediately to the airline metaphor. Well, yeah, if that person flies, 52 weeks a year, then they should get on the plane first. I'm okay with that. I've got no problem with that happening. And the question is how do you actually execute that in a retail format? So like I said, I think I see that in certain forms of retail being a likelihood, and in fact, maybe even a differentiator or a strategic advantage. You can book an appointment, go in, have a very different experience when you go to the store. You don't worry about being, crowded out by other people or having to stand in line. And I think, some formats are going to be very predisposed to making that successful. I think the larger ones may struggle a bit. They, we saw them do the seniors hours, opening hours, things like that. And I think that was very smart. But will they go as far as to do the best customer piece? I think they will do some things around best customers once they start to realize and look at the data and really understand how the various segments are performing in their stores, and they start talking to them to find out where the pain points are for those customers.
Let's talk about consumer habits for a bit. You called it a jump ball moment, like when we move, that's a jump ball moment. I'd never seen such a circuit breaker pulled on consumer habits. Like we don't really have a playbook for this. I see some regression to the mean, so to speak, to kind of get to your data background, because I see long lines at HomeSense, retailers like HomeSense and Winners that didn't have e-commerce, and my quarantine has ended. I'm going to Winners. So it seems like there's some regression to the mean, but I've got to think there's new consumer habits that have been formed. I mean, it's been an intense 10 or 11 weeks, and we're not through it yet. The COVID era could be 18 months, 24 months, who knows? But anything you've observed around the new habits, or any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, we should recognize that retail therapy or shopaholics is a real problem out there, right? So there are some people who have missed their fix of getting into retail, and so that's not surprising. I think the home sense thing in particular, I do believe that a lot of people kind of have woken up to living in their homes 24 hours a day and realizing, there's things that need to get changed around here. So it's not shocking to me that, again, certain categories are having different experiences. Let's go back to 9/11 as the example. For me, that's sort of a good metaphor for what we're going through. Post 9/11, everybody said airline travel would never come back. Like nobody was going to get on a plane, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in 6 months, airline travel was back to normal at even levels which were above where they were pre 9/11. So people went back to airline travel, but the experience for security and airport protocols and what happened, they were forever changed, right? I mean, we don't think about anything about taking off our shoes and putting our laptops through separately in an airport, et cetera. And I think we're in the same place as it pertains to the retail community and our actions just generally. I mean, do you think somebody's going to fly across the country for one meeting after having worked from home and done video chat for the last 10 weeks? And the answer is no, I don't think, or at least far, far, far fewer are going to do that now that, senior executives and everyone's discovered that you can actually work constructively from home. It's got its own challenges, but you can do that.
Yeah.
So, what are the key changes that we're going to see? Let's just talk about three. One of them we've already kind of touched on a little bit. I'd say the first is this whole work from home element. And, I actually do a little correlation in my mind. I'd love to see the data on this, but I think part of the reason why there's been the adoption of e-commerce is not just because the stores were closed, but also because we were home all the time. And, one of the big issues I think people naturally have is, this delivery is going to come, and it's that whole element. I'm going to be there. Do I have to go to the depot to pick it up, et cetera? If you're home 24/7, why not? Order whatever you want. Comes to the door. You don't have to go out. And I think that, I wrote an article in Forbes on how our homes and our home lives have transformed, and the opportunities that would exist for retailers as a result of that, whether that's home office or home office-like elements. People are going to continue to work from home in some capacity going forward. Is it 2 days a week? Is it completely from home for a period of time? I don't know. But as retail open up, there are opportunities for people to really think about how they address this new norm for individuals. Home entertainment or home games, who would have thought that puzzles would have a resurgence, right?
Yeah, right on. Right.
Yet people are looking for things to do. And in the same theme as that, hobbies. Like, I think, as you're sitting at home, there's only so much Netflix and Disney Plus that you can watch. And at some point, you're looking for something else to do. So I think we're going to see even the category around hobbies will probably see a resurgence as well as people start to get back to painting or whatever sort of floated their boat.
Gardening, gardening's huge now.
Gardening is enormous. I mean, try and find a vegetable plant, which comes back to the third point, in a nursery these days. That's an adventure. It's looking for the needle in the haystack. The second one is e-commerce, obviously, and the growth is there. But I think the more interesting thing is the willingness that consumers have had to embrace and try other things versus kind of the pure Amazon perfect e-commerce versioning, right? So whether it's click and collect or shop by video, which I've seen some retailers try, at the end of the day, the consumer is open for this journey to try and do things differently than they have in the past. And, click and collect's been around in Europe for decades. And retailers here were unwilling to kind of take the step to e-commerce unless they could deliver the whole thing. And I think even restaurants were kind of in the same space. And so, you've got a complete revitalization of that, accepting alternate forms because you can't get everything absolutely perfect today. And then the last thing I think we'll see is a real focus on local. And consumers love discounts and low prices. And so whether it's Winners or whether it's Walmart or the other retailers that sort of stand for that, it's great. But I think we're going to see a more local focus just generally come through, from whether it's from fresh goods or foods, or whether it's manufactured goods, or whether it's just about travel. I think that local will be a big angle that we'll see at least for the next 12 to 18 months. And maybe there'll be a residual level that'll be there for a way. So to your point, there's going to be regression to our old ways. I think, we've all been beaten into that behavior, but what do they say? It takes 50, 60 days, whatever, to develop a new behavior. And we're on day like 75 of this thing.
Or a global pandemic, right?
Yeah, right. So I think a great deal of change is going to remain in the system, and again, I think that's positive.
Let's last question, and we've been focusing more around loyalty programs and retailers, but I wanted to touch on your vast experience in the CPG, fast moving consumer goods area, and I kind of sometimes describe them as long suffering because they kind of would love to develop a deeper relationship with consumers. I think back to puzzles. I think Heinz did just such a wonderful, fun thing with their all red puzzle. I mean, that's just, that's just such a brilliant, fun thing. But, I'm now getting my beer delivered to my doorstep, which is a wonderful thing. Thank you, Steam Whistle. They deliver and they give me a nice wave and wonderful. I don't know why I'd do anything different in the future. Now, I got to be thinking that there's a lot of CPG firms and brands who are thinking, is this that point? Is this that tipping point? Is this intersection of trend and opportunity to form new habits that there's an opportunity there? Or is it just unit economics are just never going to make that work? And there's just too many problems breaking relationships with grocers. Where do you sit on that? I'm sure you've sat at a lot of tables where that conversation has come up, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a confluence of a number of things happening simultaneously. So, would you be so happy getting your beer delivery if you weren't at home? And you're back to the old grocery gateway days of figuring out the window that you want the beer to be delivered in, and everybody wants the same window, right? So I think and the other side is if retailers in general begin doing a better job of direct to consumer, then, again, will they occupy the space that might be there for a select number of scale consumer brands that might be able to make it work. So I think it's how about the answer of it's sort of I think selectively in certain categories it could make sense. The unit economics are going to be a challenge, but so is the consumer attitude. I think that you really need to have a branded experience that needs to be significantly more pronounced or different than what it is today. And I'm just not sure that, a consumer, let's go back to your puzzle example in Heinz ketchup. I mean, talk about a category dominant brand. But do you really want to order your Heinz ketchup direct? And why are you going to do that? You've got a perfectly acceptable way to do it. Now you can get click and collect or to the store door or to your home door delivery. Why is that going to be different over the next little while? So I think it really comes down to certain categories where you've got niche brands or ones which can create and craft a sort of a unique and interesting story and value proposition and sort of a product. And for those, it's as good a time as any to kind of start to create those. And whether it's a microbrewery who is delivering and eliminating the need for you to go out and get it, but also finding a way to enhance that experience in some way. Does loyalty play into that? Maybe. Do they take away your empties? Maybe. What's the full service and value proposition that they're going to put in place that's going to say that and is the brand and the category that it operates in conducive to those kinds of relationships? And then at the end of the day, you're bang on to the very first question, which is, is there enough margin in what the retailer takes on the way through once you've got the promotional dollars and everything laid in behind that to say that economically you can stand the whole thing up.
So I said that was the last question, but being a retailer, I'm going to ask you a bonus question.
Okay.
And the bonus question is 3 pieces of advice, 2 starts and 1 stop for retailers. So if you were to say, start doing these 2 things right now, if you haven't already, and stop doing this if you're still doing it, what would those things be?
Okay, and I'm going to do the old good senior management thing and turn your stop basically into a start, because that's that's what you do, right? Greatest strength, greatest weakness. Let's say on the start side, the first one I'd say is I think start to embrace a good is better than perfect approach. And I think that's a mindset to innovation that will allow you to really explore and test and understand different alternatives. And especially in this time of rapid change, you need to be nimble and you need to have a good is better than perfect view of the world. I think the second thing I would say on start is something we haven't talked about at all, but truly value your frontline staff and support them and provide the tools and the mechanisms to allow them to operate as effectively as they can. And so whether that's communications or whether it's providing incremental support and training, or whether it's allowing a digital tool which allows you to do recognition, I really think successful retailers in this time of change will be the ones that are connecting with and supporting their front line as much as they can. And then on the stop side, I'm going to go back to my roots, which is loyalty. And I'm going to say, let's stop ignoring your loyalty program and customer data. Yes, there's a bunch of change. Yes, there's lots that's going on. Yes, you have to be creative. But in that loyalty program and in the customer information and data that you're collecting is a rich trove of insights and a way for you to, do what I've always said, which is drive a more relevant experience and connect with your customers and use that as a platform for dialogue. And, I think it's time for, and you started to see it. I mean, obviously I'm still an Airmiles collector and very active, and it's been interesting to see the evolution even over the last 10 weeks. The first 3 or 4 radio silence. The next couple, I started to get a couple of communications more around how their service was evolving and what was happening. So it was communication. And in the last couple, I've actually started to see the offer pool start to increase and they're kind of coming back to normal because they've recognized that my shopping patterns have changed as well. And so now they're like, oh, wait a second, here's a really good customer we haven't seen in a few weeks. What alternatives are they using and how do I get them to get back to kind of their past performance? And so I'm seeing the offer pool start to come back. So yeah, so good is better than perfect. Value your frontline staff, support them, and stop not paying attention to your loyalty program. I do think we're going to see a renaissance because I think a lot of companies woke up, blew the cobwebs off their loyalty initiative and went, we don't have the asset we think that we should have here. And this is going to be important for, either future work around this pandemic or around future things that might impact us the way this has impacted us. So it's a huge asset for companies if they do it right.
Well, Bryan, you've been very generous with your time. Great to hear your voice, if not see you in person. How can people, you mentioned Forbes, I think you're back writing for Forbes, but how can people kind of keep up with what your latest thoughts are, get in touch, or just follow what you're thinking about the day-to-day in the COVID era and beyond?
Yeah, well, it's the age old. I'm on Twitter, at Pearson for Loyalty, on Forbes. If you do go to Forbes.com and just search my name, Bryan with a Y, you'll find a rich trove of articles going back about 3 or 4 years. Of course, with the world changing, it's there. And you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect with people, and I push my contact out through that platform as well.
Well, awesome. Well, Bryan, thanks so much for spending time with the Voice of Retail. Very generous with your time. Love to have you back on later in the year, and we'll see how this is all playing out and get your observations. But until then, for you and your family, stay safe, have a great week, and look forward to catching up again sometime soon.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure chatting with you this morning.
Well, thanks to Nicola and Bryan for being my guests, and thanks to Omnovos for the support of this episode. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. Please rate and review, and be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc. You can learn more about me on www.emmyleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a safe week.